Hello everyone, my name is Isabel and today I'm going to tell you 5 basic tips to start painting watercolor. What you have to know if you want to start painting from zero. This is of course my opinion, but I've been painting watercolor for 18 years, so you can trust me in this. Also, this video is not sponsored by any brand, so all the opinions are my own. Let's start. The first thing we are going to talk is about paper. And there are two types of paper apart from the roughness and the weight, which be cotton paper and cellulose paper. Normally, when you start painting, they recommend that you use cotton paper because it is so much better. But I'm going to tell you that if you are starting, it is not necessary to use cotton paper. Cotton paper is much more expensive and absorbs much more water, which is much more difficult to control at first when you don't know how to paint. Cellulose paper is so much cheaper, which will make you less afraid of making mistakes, and when it dries faster, it will be easier for you to control that water and that paint on the paper. When you have more experience and more budget, you can start using that cotton paper. I have some examples for you to see. Here I show you a watercolor made on cotton paper. This is Arches paper, and as you see, this watercolor is made completely wet on wet. And I also show you this other watercolor that is made in cellulose paper. This is Canson paper, which as you can see looks very good too. I also show you this sketchbook, which is a honeymoon sketchbook, and all these paintings that are from my tutorials on my online classes are made of cellulose paper. Cellulose paper is also very good when you go out to paint outside, because it dries much faster, and I use it also on my online classes, because that way I don't have to wait when recording those tutorials for the paper to dry. So the final advice could be start using cellulose paper, and when you have more experience and more budget, you can take the leap to the cotton paper, especially if you want to start working wet on wet. The second thing I'm going to tell you is the brushes. And the same thing happens as with the paper. It seems that to paint well you have to use natural hair brushes, but these brushes are much more expensive. They are more difficult to control because they take a lot of water, and they are also made with animal hair that some people prefer not to use. So I also recommend start painting with synthetic brushes, such as these from Skoda, which are much cheaper and much easier to handle at first, or these from Princeton or Daler-Rowney. Some brushes now are synthetic, but emulate the properties of the natural hair brushes, such as these ones that are from Skoda Versatile. So the final advice could be start with synthetic brushes, and when you have more experience and more budget, you can take the leap to the natural hair brushes if you don't mind the animal hair. As for the paints, I always recommend using tubes better than pans. Why? Because in the pans the color is usually less saturated and you have to add more water, and it is more difficult to obtain a very intense color. And also, although the tubes are more expensive, in the long term they come out cheaper. In addition, the paint is always more creamier and it's easier to obtain very intense colors. I recommend you brands that are very good and that are not necessarily the most expensive in the range. For example, these from White Nights work very well. They have very intense colors, very beautiful, and are not as expensive as other brands. Also, in that same range, you can use this from Sennelier. And this brings me to my next advice. Always before you start painting, don't forget to wet your watercolor paints. to moisten them with a spray a few minutes before start painting. This will make the watercolors moisturized and creamy, and it will be so much easier to get a very intense color. Here I show you these watercolors that I'm going to use first are dry, and when I take the color I have to add more water in the brush, so the color is more faded. While when I take the color in some watercolors that I have previously moistened, the color I get is much more intense. And my last advice would be always use 2 containers of water. When we are going to paint, a container of water, I'm going to use it to pick up the colors and mix them. And once we have painted the area and want to change the color, we clean that dirty brush in the other container. That way, when I pick up a new color again, I will do it with clean water and my colors will be clean and bright. As you can see, one of the bowls is very dirty and the other one is practically clean. And this could be the 5 basic tips to start painting watercolor. I hope you liked the video. Tell me if you want more videos like this. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And thank you very much for watching and see you very soon in the next one. Bye!